Again, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining. Last week, Rabbi Davidovich gave us an amazing summary of what we did until now, and in Mitzvah Hashem this week, he will give us a taste, an overview, a good broad picture of what we are going to be doing coming up. And so we will ask Rabbi Davidovich to take it away from here, and everyone will enjoy.
Hello, thank you, Rabbi Friedman, for this opportunity to learn some more Tanya with all of you. And what I would like to do, following Rabbi Friedman's guidance, is to review the next few prakim of Tanya along the lines of the way that I did it last week. In the last class that I gave, just a week ago, I reviewed everything from the cover page of the Sefer Shel Beinonim through chapter 17. And now what I would like to do is, again, review the cover page as well as chapters 18 through 25, Perek Yud Ches through Perek Chaf Hey, inclusive, Ve'ad Bechlal. Those chapters are the second part of the Sefer Shel Beinonim. And in order to understand what the second part of Sefer Shel Beinonim is, what I like to do is look at the cover page again to remember what the Sefer is all about. According to the Baal Tanya, the Sefer that he wrote, called Sefer Shel Beinonim, is there to explain what a Beinoni is, but primarily because Beinoni is a word from our Gemara and from the Zohar, but what the Baal Tanya wants to do is explain a pasuk. The pasuk is in the cover page, that the matter, which davar, the matter, if you look at into that pasuk, either the observance of the Torah or the mitzvah of teshuvah, or maybe both, in fact, are karov me'od, are very accessible. So what does it mean that it is very accessible? So the Baal Tanya's first answer covered chapters 1 through 17, in which he explained that the observance of the Torah can be very close to a Jew, because all he has to do is make sure that his nefesh elokis, that his godly soul, can overcome the obstacles of his animal nature by not confronting the actual soul in an attempt to transform that animal soul itself, which might be too difficult for most of us to do, but rather to win the battles, to constantly win the battles over beficha ubilvavcha la'asoso, meaning the thoughts, speech, and actions of a person. And if you can continue to defeat the tendencies of your animal nature, not in terms of really transforming the nature itself, but merely to transform the levushim, or rather to affect, I should say, to affect the levushim, the garments, the way that the soul expresses itself, thought, speech, and deed, then that is karov, that is something that everyone is able to do. Now in chapter 18, he begins the second section by telling us, focusing on one line, and I'll read the first line of chapter 18, which will give us a sense of what he wants to do now. Uletosefes biur, I will continue to explain, I will add an insight, be'er heitev, with extreme clarity, milas me'od. I want to explain the word me'od, which we spoke about in the last class. Shebepasuk ki karov elecha hadavar me'od v'gomer. Because it's one thing to say that something is doable. It's something else to say that it is very doable. So why is it very doable? Not everyone is, not just that not everyone is a tzaddik, not everyone has great capabilities, certainly not in the obvious sense. So the Baal Tanya explains now, chapters 18 through 25, two essential ideas, one building on the other, as to why the observance of Torah is exceedingly ma'od accessible. And here we will begin. In Perek Yud Ches, he begins by telling us that the reason it is karov ma'od, it is very accessible, is because all of us have it. You might not think you have it, but every Jew, all Jews have as a Yerusha, which means an inheritance, from Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, from our Avos, this capability. Meaning, since it belongs to everyone, as we are descended from the Avos, therefore, just as inheritance is something that has nothing to do with inherent capability, inheritance has nothing to do with skill or spirituality. Someone inherits something because they are the child or they are related to the one who is bequeathing. So too, every Jew has this capability. That is the first easy answer as to why it is Karuv Ma'od, which means, and he says this explicitly, that even the biggest Amei Haaretz can be a total ignoramus. You can even be among the Poshim, Jews who do Averos. We still connect to the Avos. We are all still connected to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we are all still connected to Hashem Echad. And this is a connection that, like inheritance, transcends anything having to do with the intellect. So what is this nature? What is it now? The Baal Tanya wants to explain, moving on to chapter 19. What is it that we inherited from them? It's one thing to say we inherited it, but the Baal Tanya wants to take it a step further and explain now, starting with chapter 19, what is it? What is that inheritance that makes it possible to live a life of so he explains in chapter 19 that the Jewish neshama has an innate nature to want to connect to Hashem, even at the expense of leaving the body. Meaning, even though, as he explained in chapters 1 and 2, that we are comprised of two neshamos, we have a nefesh bahamis and nefesh elokis, but when it comes to the Jewish nature, our nature is specifically more nefesh elokis oriented, that we would be willing, and we have shown ourselves willing, as he will continue to explain, to connect to Hashem, even if it means leaving our body behind. Now, how does this manifest itself? So Baal Tanya says this innate nature manifests itself in how even Poshim, meaning even Jewish sinners, are willing to give up their lives against all reason, meaning this violates the basic tenet of animal life, which is to want to live physically as long as possible. And a Jew is willing to give this up rather than even appear to acknowledge some sort of foreign power, avodah zarah, even though their neshamos were asleep and inactive for so long. So a Jew could remain entirely unconnected on an explicit, revealed level to his Yiddishkeit and Hashem. It appears to be so, yet somehow, and we have seen this over the course of these many centuries, that Jews have shown themselves willing to give up their lives, not only rather than worship avodah zarah, rather than even appear to be worshiping avodah zarah. And this is something that we gained, that we all have in our Jewish neshama, and this is why he specifically points out that it goes against all reason, so that it has nothing to do with the intellect, and why it even applies to Poshim, because there are many, many stories, not only Hasidic stories, but stories going back thousands of years, that Jews, and from the Gemara and from Midrashim, that Jewish sinners are willing to do anything and everything to maintain that closest to Hashem at that moment when it counts. So now, here's the thing, and this takes up most of the space until the conclusion of this section. It's fine to say a Jew is willing to give up his life, but why does giving up one's life, which is an extreme case, right? The Jewish tendency, the Jewish nature for Mesiras Nefesh, which is a beautiful thing. How does that translate into a life, not a moment of death, not Kiddush Hashem at death? How does that translate into a life of not Mesiras Nefesh, where Chas v'Shalom, some dictator or evil soldier has a gun to a head, but rather to a life of Torah and mitzvos? So here is the bridge to Perek Chaf, chapter 20. The Baal Tanya writes over here in chapter 20 that really all mitzvos are branches of the meta-dual concept that is the basis for the Jewish connection to Hashem. Yes, there are 613 mitzvos, and it's true that 613 means there are 248 positive mitzvos and 365 negative mitzvos. But really, at its root, there are two mitzvos. Two mitzvos that we heard directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai. And the two mitzvos are known as Anochi and Lo Yiheh Lecha. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, which if you take it a look, this is the beginning of the Aseret Devros, is a positive declarative statement by Hashem, that Hashem is the God who took us out of Mitzrayim. That phrase Anochi, which we understand from the Gemara, is a declaration, and technically speaking, in the dikduk of it, in the grammar of it, is not a command, but in halacha we understand that as being a command. It's a declaration. And that declaration, that positive declaration that Hashem is our God who took us out of Mitzrayim, that is the root of all 248 mitzvos say, all 248 positive commandments. And lo yeh lecho elohim acherim al panai, you should have no other gods but me, is understood by the Baal Tanya as being the root of all shasa mitzvos lo saseh, all 365 negative commandments. Which means that this two-sided coin, Anochi and Lo Yeh Lecha, is not merely a declaration of, hey, listen, you should know that I'm your God and you shouldn't have any foreign gods. But rather, it's a much deeper idea, which, if I might add parenthetically here, is the focus of what seems to me to be the majority of what we call the Maimarim of Chasidus all over. Meaning when a person hears about all the Maimarim, Torah or Likutei Torah, the Maimarim of all the Chabad Rebbeim, they really seem to focus on the ideas that are being expressed here in the next few prakim. Namely, and this is the Hasidic take on it, that it just doesn't mean I am your God. There are other gods, but I am your God. And you shouldn't listen to those other gods, you should listen to me. Rather, Hasidus explains, especially here, beginning with this chapter, the idea that kula kamei kelo choshev, that nothing is worth anything in the presence of Hashem. The whole world is considered as nothing before him. Why? Because, and there are many ideas here, ani Hashem lo shanisi. Here's another deep idea of Hasidus that is from, it's from Navi. I, Hashem, have not changed. There is no change. Hashem is the same. Before he created the world, ato kodem shenivra olam, ato la'achar shenivra ha'olam. I am God before I created the world, and I am God after I created the world. There's no change in Hashem whatsoever. And this is because the world is insignificant to him. If you were to tell a billionaire who discovered he had a penny in his pocket, and you would ask him, tell me, are you any wealthier now? What does it feel like to have added wealth? And he would say, what added wealth? There's no added wealth. I'm a multi-billionaire and you found a penny. So Hashem's, the level of understanding what Hashem is worth, and that a penny compared to a multi-billionaire is tremendously more significant than the whole world compared to Hashem. The whole world is insignificant to him as a word or a thought or an unexpressed thought is to a human being. If a person were to say a word, you would say, wow, you said a word. Do you feel exhausted? Do you feel depleted? No, after one word, I don't feel depleted. You had a thought go through your head. Do you feel depleted as a result of that thought that you had? No. That is the way the world compares to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because Hashem does not change. Hashem remains changeless, and the world is insignificant to him. And this leads us to Perek Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, that the difference between Hashem and us in this way is that when it comes to Hashem, the world is still kilo choshev. It's as naught, it's as nothing, even after it was created through Dibur. So that, for example, if you have a thought in your head, the thought in your head is not taking anything away from you because it's still in your head. It's still in your mind. Once something has been expressed, once something has been said, it's already outside of you. The Baal Tanya here writes in Perek Chaf Aleph that when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even something that has been expressed, so that it already has been created because of something that Hashem has said, the world is still kilo choshev, as if it is still within his thought. You see, with humans, Once a word is expressed, it's beyond his control. But with Hashem, even after he has spoken something out, it is still totally within his control and still insignificant as far as its true meaning. So that the whole world, even while it continues to exist, and all of us feel our own independent reality, it is still part of Hashem's reality. And it is all still part of Devar Hashem. Now, so what is the difference between the world, Hashem, and our relationship with him? Before the world was created, after the world was created, the difference is in how we perceive things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed there to be a difference in how we can perceive the world, that we perceive that there would be a difference before the creation of the world and after the creation of the world. And Hashem created this through a model of creating limitations in how the world or in how Hashem is perceived. So that we have a sense, which the Baal Tanya says is an illusion of independent existence. So that is why we refer to other gods as Elohim Acherim, not just to mean other gods. The word Acherim, of course, on a certain literal level, means other. But the Baal Tanya explains that Acher is also related to the word Achor, as in Achorayim, as in something behind us, which is the opposite of Ponim, Ponai. Lo yelecha Elohim Acherim al Ponai. Achor means behind God, so to speak, as we'll explain. Ponim refers to before him, in front of him, seeing his face. So what did Hashem do here in Perek Chaf Beis? Baal Tanya explains that Hashem created the perception so that he would allow us to see beyond it, to allow it for reward and punishment. This view that there is something real other than Hashem is the root of Avodah Zarah. So that Anochi Hashem Elokecha, just to take us back to chapter 20 for a moment and connect it back to chapter 20, does not mean I am the Lord your God, meaning I am your boss. It means I am the totality of your reality. And Lo Yelecha means you should have no reality, no acknowledgement of some other reality that would put you at any distance from me. So this is the difference between what I might call a superficial or conventional view of these first two mitzvos and these two mitzvos the way that the Baal Tanya explains it. According to the Baal Tanya, Anochi Hashem Elokecha means I am the totality of your existence, of all existence. This is your reality. You should have no perception of existence that has me somehow outside of the picture or not truly all significant. So now, as deep as this idea is, and as much as a person might say, look, I'm not I have to be some top level theologian, to understand that when we speak of God, we don't only mean a boss in the sky, but we mean reality itself. And Avodah Zarah means fragmenting of reality, so that I see reality as being different parts. Hashem wants this, and I want something else. Hashem wants this, but there are other things in the world. There are other parts of reality. That latter is what the root of Avodah Zarah. So Baal Tanya says, these deep ideas are not something just to leave to tzaddikim and to rebbes and to the holiest neshamos that are around. They are meant to be understood on a certain level or appreciated by all of us. Why is this? Because of what he begins now to describe in Perek Chaf Gimel, chapter 23. He says, mitzvos that we do are an expression of Ratzon Hashem. And therefore, in the language of Pnimius HaTorah, mitzvos are called Evarei de Malka, the king's limbs. Just as limbs express what it is that the mind wants, mitzvos express what it is that Hashem wants to do with the world. Talmud Torah goes beyond that, because Torah is Ratzon Hashem itself. So when a person does a mitzvah, whatever that mitzvah is, what is happening at the time that he is doing that mitzvah? A mitzvah makes a person a limb of the king, of the Ratzon Hashem. A person does a physical mitzvah, whatever that mitzvah is, he is now expressing what it is that Hashem wants, the same way that a hand expresses what it is that the mind wants when the hand works well. So that whether it's talis or tefillin or mezuzah or Shabbos or Kiddush, they are all expressing Hashem's will. When a Jew learns Torah, what's happening is that he is accessing Hashem's will itself. So Talmud Torah binds a person to Ratzon Hashem itself. This is the power, this is what a mitzvah does on two levels. The doing of mitzvos, and then specifically, Baal Tanya focuses in Chav Gimel on the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So now this takes us to Perek Chav Daled 24, where he explains the reverse chas v'shalom, which is that when a person does an aveira, what happens? Hashem has specifically said that it is his desire that this aveira, whichever of the 365 aveiros, not be done. Therefore, anyone who does an aveira separates from Ratzon Hashem and separates from the Achdus Hashem, the idea that Hashem has a singular will, that his will be done in this world. So that a mitzvah connects one to Ratzon Hashem, the singular Ratzon Hashem, and Aveira separates a person from Ratzon Hashem. It's as if there is a separate Ratzon, a separate will active in the universe. And this is what relates to Avodah Zarah, because it is foreign to what it is that Hashem wants. And here the Baal Tanya gets a little strong in the language. There's always this passage here in Perek Chav Daled, which whenever I review it, it creates a certain pang in my heart, where he goes a little bit of a Musar Shmuz. He says, you should know that when a Jew does an Aveira, and you see it separates him from Hashem the way that Tumah, we think of impurity as being separated from Hashem. He says, but it's far worse than Tumah. Because when a Jew is doing an Aveira, it's worse than any actual tummy thing that he created in the world. Because that tummy thing that he created in the world, imagine a pig, some treif food, whatever it is, it exists. It's not the fault of the thing that it exists. It exists because Hashem created it. But when a Jew does an Aveira, then that he is knowingly putting himself into that same space, that same understanding of Tumah. And then the second very harsh thought, if I might, offer some editorial comment here, which I really shouldn't. But the Baal Tanya says at the end of here, Perek Chav Daled, is that a person might say, look, so he did an Aveira, but that's okay, because tomorrow he won't do the Aveira. So it's not anything permanent. But the Baal Tanya says you might think it's not permanent, and of course it isn't truly permanent. However, during the time that he is doing the Aveira, his Nefesh Bahamis and that level of klipa, of separating from Hashem, is drawing down the Chelek Elokah Mimal, the Nefesh Elokis, and subjecting that Nefesh Elokis to the greatest insult. And here he uses a very powerful image of, imagine someone taking the king's head and smushing it, rubbing it into some sort of dung heap or garbage heap. You're bringing the Achdus, Hashem created the world, Hashem Echad, and you're fragmenting him, and you're bringing him into a broken world. So the Baal Tanya doesn't want to end this section on a negative note, so he concludes here with Perek Chav Hey, which is the conclusion of this section. And he says that this approach, meaning the approaches of chapters 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24, explain this aspect now of Karov Me'od. Because when you understand that there is no Aveira that cannot be avoided by contemplating the reality, which is a reality that you already have, because you are a descendant of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, so it's already innate in you, that you realize that if push came to shove, and as we have been pushed and we have been shoved for many centuries now, and a Jew just has to think, I don't want to separate from Hashem Echad even for a moment. And just as you understand, a person naturally would understand that no obstacle to a mitzvah involves more Mesiras Nefesh than literal Mesiras Nefesh for Hashem Echad, then this will drive a person, if he thinks about it, he or she thinks about it, to want to do every mitzvah that comes your way and to avoid any aveira that comes your way. Because it isn't just a mitzvah. That mitzvah is a manifestation of your already existing belief of Anochi Hashem Elokecha. That aveira, which might seem to be some sort of minor aveira in your minds, is but an expression of another God, of Lo Yeh Lecha Elohim Acherim Al Panai, just as you would not wish to serve Avodah Zarah even for a moment, and a Jew has to relinquish his life rather than being over to Avodah Zarah, even though tomorrow they might leave him alone so he can live a life full of Torah and mitzvos. This will hold a person to loyalty, because he will say, I would rather give up my life than reject Anochi, so I can certainly fight any of the more minor obstacles in life by adhering to a branch of Anochi. So easy. And Baal Tanya concludes by saying, this fortitude can come from reading these chapters of Tanya, but they also come from saying Shema twice a day. He says that's why Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jews to say Kriya Shema twice a day, because Kriya Shema and the Mesiras Nefesh that is inherent in the words of Kriya Shema, right? We say Hashem Echad, and then we say that Hashem demands means you have to give up your life. Contemplating this idea and then following this idea of Mesiras Nefesh, which you already have, to its natural conclusion in the observance of 613 mitzvos, will render all of the Torah easily accessible to you. And that is the conclusion of this part 2 of Sefer Shel Beinonim. Thank you, Rabbi Friedman. And I just want to add one more word, not so much as part of this, but as I am summarizing, I feel the need to remind myself of this and remind others that even though I have found this method of summarizing and understanding the bigger meta picture of the different prakim in Tanya, I found as I reviewed it that the Baal Tanya finds ways of inserting beautiful Torah and Eitzah, advice and guidance, even in just a few lines of Tanya. Meaning, I didn't have to go through all 8 chapters just to get some insight. Meaning, the Baal Tanya manages to squeeze in loads of insight on different areas of the observance of Torah and mitzvos in every line. So, just something to think about to encourage my own chitas observance as well. Thank you, Rabbi Friedman, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Davidovich. Crystal clear, beautiful. Yasher koyach. V'chein hala.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone
so
for
much.
joining.
Thank you all. And we'll talk whenever.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.